or similar goals. Members can learn from each other, and also they can share their wins and challenges, and they can build valuable connections that just goes beyond learning, from me. Then some members wanted even more direct access to me to grow faster. That's how my income stream number 7, high-level coaching, was born. So in my creator coaching studio, when you join our pro coaching level, you and I work together one-on-one on your personal branding and also on your channel strategy. It's like literally you and me, not a team member or something like that. And not only that, pro members get direct feedback from me on titles, thumbnails, hooks, and strategy. And because this level of coaching requires my direct involvement and it's directly traded by my time, I keep the spots very limited, and we actually filled up the first initial spots, but you can join our waiting list to be notified when we open new spots if you're interested. There's a link in the description below. Check it out. The difference between the memberships and the coaching is that in the coaching, you basically work with me one-on-one. And in the membership, it's more like a group coaching thing where you don't necessarily interact with me one-on-one, but you have the ability to ask things and also communicate with other members. I have all the details in the description below. We have a website for that. So if you're interested, check it out. Maybe the website might not be updated by then, but if you would join the waiting list, we'll just email you with every single detail that you'll need. So basically, this is exactly what I meant at the beginning of this video. Instead of juggling multiple disconnected side hustles, you actually build a one cohesive system with 7 income streams that all support each other. And everything builds on everything else. Your YouTube content basically builds trust, and then it leads people to your passive knowledge products, and then they might be interested into getting into your membership, and then they might become coaching clients, which gives you insights to create better content. And also when you're creating content on YouTube, you can use affiliate and brand partnerships to sustain the content creation. And also there's YouTube AdSense. It's almost like a self-reinforcing cycle where each piece strengthens the others. It's more sustainable, more scalable, and honestly more fulfilling than trying to do everything at once, because you actually get really good at one thing. Let's bring this all together with immediate action steps so you can take action and not procrastinate in the next 30 days. And success comes from focusing on the foundation first. So your first crucial step is actually getting absolute clarity on your unique selling proposition. It's basically what makes you you, what makes you unique, why should people care about you instead of watching other people? This is a very, I think, hard question to answer. So I have a free USB Finder guide that you can download for free. It will help you identify what makes your perspective and expertise uniquely valuable in today's creator economy and how you can monetize that. It's in the description. Check it out. Next, you need to choose your platform and make a genuine commitment to it. As we discussed earlier, depth on one platform is far more powerful than spreading yourself thin across the many. So pick YouTube. I'm just kidding. You can pick whatever you want. Your third step is finding your niche and your delivery style. Whichever content pillar you want to pick in and whichever industry you want to go in a content creation, you need to be super clear on it and you have to have a strategy. I know this is also hard, so I also have a free niche navigator guide that will help you with this. It will show you how to match what you're good at with what people want and need. It's basically helped you to build a strong foundation for your business. It's free. It's in the description below if you're interested. Most importantly though, remember that trust matters more than anything else. When you create content or talk to your audience, we always need to focus being honest and helpful, because it will make people trust you and keep coming back for more. And also, this isn't just copying my exact path. I just want to remind you that it's about understanding the principles and applying them to your unique situation. Because if you follow and do exactly what I did at the beginning, it's not going to work. Whether you're starting from scratch or already have some foundation, the principles are the same. It's just that the path is different. But the key is to start with focused, build with intention, and scale with integrity. Your journey begins now. Take action, okay? And just remember that success comes from building one focused system, not chasing multiple disconnected, whatever trending side hustle is. Season.
If you don't want to be like everyone else, broke, stressed, and stuck in a never-ending cycle, you need to focus on one thing.
Depends on everything that I did in the setup beforehand. And by the way, like any skill, learning to learn is the same. Our exam results, our memory, our depth of understanding, these things depend on the processes we used before when we were studying. Now imagine I shot this arrow and it landed here. Not very good. But to do better next time, I have to know what to change to get it into the center. I cannot keep just firing arrows off randomly expecting to get better. I might get a bullseye once in a while, but it's not going to be consistent, and once the target moves further away, it's not going to work anymore. Same thing in learning. If we get a bad exam result, we need to know what to change. And just because we get a better exam result in a different exam, it doesn't mean we actually solved the problem. So this is essentially the experiential cycle. We have an experience, we observe the result, we think about what we need to change, and then we do an experiment to see if it made it any better. Without this cycle, we cannot learn any new skill. This is pretty straightforward and obvious. But here's the part that traps people. Whether it's learning about learning skills or learning to shoot an arrow or learning any other skill, the fastest way to learn any skill is to learn more slowly. This is the theory overload trap. Now, most of you know that I've got a program that teaches people to learn more efficiently. And one of the things that I can do on the program that I can't do on YouTube is I get to observe how the students behave, and I can track their progress much more closely. So take a look at these two students and see if you can guess which one ended up being more academically successful. First one to look at is this one here, Suresh, who was on the program for 5 weeks and got through 31% of the program. And the second student that I want you to look at is Enzo, who was on the program for 54 weeks and got through 20% of the program. Who do you think improved the fastest? So despite covering less of the course, it was actually Enzo who ended up with better academic results. He went from a baseline of 62% to the latest exam result of 92%, compared to Suresh, and this is the surprising part, Suresh actually went from 80% to 71%. Suresh actually got worse after working on it for 5 weeks. Why did Suresh get worse? I'll give you a clue. It's not just because Enzo had so much more time to work on things. Well, the answer is theory overload. Okay, now imagine this bowl is your brain. Very smooth. Just kidding. Now, your brain has a limited amount of cognitive resources that it can spend. It's like how much memory or RAM your computer has. So let's say that these wooden blocks represent your cognitive resources. Now, whenever we learn a new skill, we're introduced to new things that we need to think about. So each thing takes resources to keep it in mind and think about it. Hold my arrow more tightly, stabilize my core, keep my shoulders relaxed, breathe more slowly, aim a little bit lower. You can see that my bowl, my capacity is becoming filled up. And on top of that, there's a certain amount of resources it takes to just perform the activity. Now, once a new skill eventually becomes a habit, the amount of resources it takes goes down. But when you're learning a new skill, it's not going to be a habit. It's going to be unfamiliar and difficult and awkward, and all of those things take additional resources to overcome. So more and more needs to be invested into just doing the actual skill. And as you can see now, we are overflowing. We've overloaded our brain's ability to think about things because we have given it too many things to think about. In the research, our brain trying to think about lots of different things at the same time is called multiple element interactivity, and it's a common reason why we enter into what's called cognitive overload. But here is the thing about learning a cognitive skill, like learning to learn, for example, unlike learning a physical skill like archery. For a physical skill, we burn energy using our body, using our muscles. For a cognitive skill, we burn effort with our brain, which means that the amount of cognitive resources it takes to just perform the skill, the act of learning is innately very high to begin with. It takes a lot of mental resources to understand new information and process it and organize it and think about where it belongs and create new memory. And all of this effort helps to translate the learning into memory and understanding. If we didn't feel this effort, we wouldn't have any memory, and that would be called passive learning. But with effective, more active learning, it takes a lot of resources to begin with, which means adding just a few more things can put us into overload very quickly. So in that case, what is the best way to learn a new skill, especially a cognitive skill? Well, at the end of the day, all of that means that when we're learning a new skill, we should only ever be trying to experiment with one or two things at the same time. So Suresh, who covered like 30% of the program in a month, would have learned over a dozen new techniques, and each technique has 2 or 3 things to think about. So that means that Suresh would have been trying to juggle 20 or 30 things at any given time. He was completely overloaded, and therefore his brain was not able to actually learn the skill. And this is exactly why some students, if they don't realize this trap, can spend months or even years trying to learn a new skill and feeling like it is impossible to get it right, because no matter how much time they put into it, they do not seem to be improving. It is incredibly frustrating. So here's the secret to learning any skill the right way. Always balance your new theory with practice. If you practice without any theory, it's aimless. If you practice with too much theory, you're getting overloaded. So the trick is to balance new theory coming in with your existing skills becoming habits. Like I mentioned before, when skills become habits, your brain figures out a more efficient way to do it. It doesn't require so many cognitive resources anymore. It finds a shortcut. And so the amount of cognitive resources it takes to perform the skill goes down as more of this new skill just starts to become an old habit. And eventually, what took a lot of concentration to do now takes virtually no thinking at all, and you can still do it just as accurately and just as consistently. We have freed up more cognitive resources to take in some new theory and turn those into habits. For some skills and techniques, it can take weeks, if not months, to develop them into habits. Whereas for some, it can just take a few hours. And by balancing the theory with practice, we can achieve optimum skill growth, where we are practicing, and every time we practice, we're improving with focus and direction, but we're not getting overloaded. So here's what this looks like in practice. Let's say we've only got 5 hours a week to practice. Now that is not probably enough to form new habits very quickly, and so we're gonna need to reduce the amount of new theory we take in. And because we've got a low amount of practice and therefore a low amount of theory, the two of them are aligned and we can achieve our optimum skill growth. Now let's say we now have a little bit more free time and we want to dedicate a little bit more time to learning this skill. So we have now 20 hours a week that we can dedicate to practice. So the amount that we can practice has now gone up, which means we can also go up in the amount of theory we can take in. But it's proportional to the amount of extra practice we're getting. So as a rule of thumb, I usually say for every hour of theory, we should have at least 5 hours of practice. So for example, if we have 5 hours of practice, we would only be able to take in 1 hour of theory in this first example, whereas in the second example, we've got 20 hours of practice, therefore we can have up to 4 hours of theory. Now, unfortunately, that's just a rule of thumb. And in reality, it's a little bit more complicated because 5 hours of practicing a very complicated skill is not the same as 5 hours of practicing a very simple skill, like a new way to tie your shoelaces, in which case 5 hours of practice is probably overkill. And so what's more important and accurate than just the number of hours of practice is actually monitoring how quickly we're able to form new habits. When new habits form, we have the mental space to take in more theory. So if we're very slow at forming new habits, then we're gonna be slower at taking in new theory. And the way you can know that new habits are forming is when you can feel that things are becoming easier and faster without compromising your accuracy and your consistency. And most of the time, you're able to get faster without trying to get faster. The speed comes with the efficiency that your brain develops at just getting better at doing it. Now, this is where I have to give props to Enzo, because Enzo realized that he was developing new habits more slowly than we would have anticipated. And so he took a year to cover 20% of the program. So instead of 5 hours of practice for every hour of theory, he was doing more like 15, 20 hours of practice for every hour of theory. So even though on the surface it looked like he was going very slowly, his skill growth was being maintained at an optimal rate because he was never letting himself get overloaded. And by the way, if you're interested in the program yourself, there's a link in the description that you can check out. Now, while theory overload has an almost 100% failure rate, the reverse is also true. Almost 100% of the time, I see someone balancing their theory intake rate with their practice and habit forming rate. They are able to learn their desired skill very smoothly and very quickly, which is why I said that I think this is one of the most important things to understand if you want to learn any skill. I hope that helps, and if you've got the capacity for just one more bit of theory, then check out this video that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I spent 7 years building a learning system that boosted my efficiency by over 60% and saved me at least 10 hours of studying per week. And although every learner's brain is different, the best thing about this system is that anyone can use it and personalize it. And I call it the PERIO system. It stands for priming, encoding, reference, retrieval, and overlearning. I'll explain all of it in a sec. One of the most common questions that people ask me is, Justin, what is the best technique for studying? And if someone asks me this, I immediately know something crucial about this person's studying ability. It is that this person does not know how learning truly works because they're thinking about techniques rather than systems. And unless that changes, you can never really be an efficient learner. Most people think of learning like this. This is how I used to look at it. Information comes in, we then do something that allows us to learn it, and we enter through this cycle of repetition to strengthen our memory. But this is just not how learning works. Learning is not just something that happens. It is an entire series of processes, and the quality of those processes affects how good your memory and your depth of understanding is going to be. If the processes involved in this learning step are bad, it means we have to have more repetition to make up for it. On the other hand, if our processes here are good, that means that we need less repetition. So instead, the right way to think about learning is a little bit more like this. Information comes into our brain, and then that information is filtered out. It's filtered based on whether we think it is relevant to what we already know, and that's based on what we already have existing in our memory. So if it's related, and if we can see how it is something that we need to hold on to, we will then go and process it a little bit more, organizing the information, making sense of it, and this is really where the understanding and the depth comes from. Once we do the processing, part of that also helps to organize the information into our memory in a structure and a model that makes sense for us, that is easy for our memory to hold on to and is relevant for our brain. If it didn't meet that filtration criteria, we are just going to forget it. Which means if information comes in and we think it's not relevant, we don't see how it connects to anything else, we don't see how it connects to anything we already know, then no matter how many times you try to put the information in, we are just going to forget it, and usually very quickly. On the other hand, once the information is in our memory, we can then retrieve that knowledge, and the retrieval process also helps to process and organize it again in a way that makes even more sense. So this is constantly refining our memory. We're then using our existing knowledge and our existing memory to help us filter any new information that comes in. Now, learning is a lot more complicated than this, by the way, but if we use this model, then we can start seeing where our own weaknesses might be. So, for example, let's take me back when I was trying to enter into medical school, studying 20 hours a day because I sucked at learning. What I was doing, I would just sit there and I'd just read through my notes. I'd go to these lectures and sit there listening, trying to understand whatever I could. And then I'd spend all the rest of the day just writing more notes, studying things again, and then eventually doing flashcards on past papers. That was like my entire life. So for me, if we look at this, information was definitely coming in and very, very quickly, but I wasn't aware that my brain was filtering it based on relevance. So I wasn't trying to make it more relevant. As a result, a lot of what I learned felt pretty random and arbitrary, and I would forget a lot of it, and so I'd have to shove it back in again, so I was trapped inside this loop. And even though occasionally bits of it did make its way in, so I was able to process it a little bit more, eventually, again, it would end up being forgotten because of the fact that it still wasn't that relevant for my brain, and I just wasn't aware that this is the process I need to try to optimize. And once I nailed that, that is what made the big difference for me. That is what flipped my learning into a mode that was much more efficient. And so this is where the PERIO system comes in. The P in PERIO stands for priming. Priming is any technique that you use before a main learning event. That could be a class, it could be a lecture, it could just be a single long study session. But it's talking about an activity that you do before you encounter a topic for the first time. It is priming your brain to learn that information more effectively. Essentially, what it's helping us do is it's helping our brain filter the information and say, hey, this new information is relevant, let's move it along into the processing. Priming is one of the most effective things that you can implement into a learning system because it's so early on in this learning flow. And if you don't get this part right, everything after this starts suffering. You will get easily overloaded and overwhelmed. You will find that your memory is very leaky. You will find that you're not able to use and retrieve that knowledge very effectively because the information was not primed. You had thrown a ball and you were not ready to catch it. The E stands for encoding, and in this diagram, it stands for this processing part here. It's talking about the part of learning that allows your brain to make sense of the information and then put it into your memory. But encoding in the learning system means that you have to have techniques that allow your brain to organize and process the information effectively. That means grouping things together, simplifying things, looking for analogies, finding connections and relationships. Looking for ways to make the information more intuitive, simpler, easier to understand. This is also the part that most people struggle with because it requires a lot of mental effort and thinking to do this, which actually puts some people off. But that is the active part of active learning. When you don't do the encoding part correctly, even though the information came in through the door, it's not able to be moved into your memory very effectively. And so even though you study a lot and a lot, you will still continuously forget a large portion of what you spent your time learning. Now, encoding is not a binary process. It's not about whether you are doing it or not. It's more of a spectrum and about creating efficiency in your processes so that you're moving information into your memory as quickly as possible. The first R in PERIO stands for reference, and this is actually just about note-taking. It's not really on this pathway, but it's about understanding that if you're trying to consume all the information all at once and you're trying to do all of the processing all at once, you're going to get overloaded very quickly if you let yourself get bogged down in details that don't help you to organize the information. In a way, you want your brain power to be focused on moving the information through here into your memory. And there are certain things that are going to be so specific and so fine and so detailed that it's not going to help do that. It's just a distraction. And that's where referencing comes in, which is taking those pieces of information and just putting them somewhere else so that you can come back to it later. This could be in the form of flashcards, a second brain app, using something like Obsidian, whatever you want to do. It's a parking lot, a dump for all the very, very fine details that you don't want to bother with while you are encoding and processing. The second R is retrieval, and retrieval is the part where you're taking information from your memory and then you are testing yourself and challenging your ability to use and apply that knowledge. Retrieval is a necessary component of every learning system. Number one, because that's what actually tests your ability to use your knowledge. But number two, because the act of retrieving knowledge actually helps you to reprocess and repackage that knowledge, which strengthens your memory and deepens your understanding. Which is where I in Perio comes in, which stands for interleaving. Interleaving is hitting a topic from multiple perspectives and multiple angles. I've actually got another video about interleaving here because it's a big topic and actually one of the most important things that you can do to upgrade your learning system. But in summary, it's about making sure that you are testing yourself in multiple perspectives rather than just the one way you learned it and just testing yourself in that one way. When you don't do interleaving, your knowledge becomes very narrow, which means yes, you may be able to answer questions if they are asked in the same way that your flashcard has it written down. But if there's a curveball question, if there's a combination of concepts that you never really thought about before, or it's just something that feels a little bit out of scope, you're gonna struggle. Usually these are the questions that separate the top learners from the rest. And the final O in Perio is for overlearning. Overlearning is when you're learning more than you need to, a little bit more out of scope and a little bit deeper and to a higher standard. It often involves a lot of repetition, for example, doing lots of practice questions or lots of flashcards or just going over things again and again. This is the part of learning that is repetitive by nature. It's what creates that faster recall and that enhanced fluency with your knowledge. It is also optional. A lot of people don't need to do overlearning because overlearning is really only effective once you're sitting really competitive assessments where the standard for excellence is very, very high. Most people and most day-to-day studying don't need to have overlearning at all. Unfortunately, most people also use overlearning strategies as their first strategy in the learning process. And that takes time and attention away from doing the priming, encoding, and retrieval parts properly. It's basically this cycle that I talked about before where you're basically just compensating for ineffective encoding through lots of repetition. So to help you evaluate your own learning system, I've actually gone ahead and created a quiz that you can go through and it will score your learning system based on each part of Perio. It's free to do. I'll chuck a link in the description below. Don't say I never do anything for you. So I'm gonna go ahead and answer these questions based on how I used to study and I'll see what the score says. And 35. %.